I was going to start today by discussing all of the various gun proposals that are on the table, but instead, the media have forced me to discuss their absolute malfeasance throughout this entire debacle. After the tragedy and the evil horror of what happened at Parkland, the media's first move was to jump to the suggestion that everyone who disagreed with them on gun control was, of course, nasty and mean. Now, this is nothing new. And I sort of got famous off of saying exactly this to Piers Morgan, because Piers Morgan was famous for doing this. I said to him that he was standing on the graves of the kids of Sandy Hook to push his agenda, and the media continued to do this. Tonight, of course, CNN is supposed to have a big town hall event where they have a bunch of the students from Parkland. We'll see if they have any of the students from Parkland who are not in favor of gun control. The answer is probably not. But the media have been using these students in order to push their gun control agenda. Now, I have never attempted to smear the students themselves. I have never said that the students don't have a right to speak. I've never insulted the students' pain. I've never insulted what the students went through. But because I say that you ought to have expertise on a topic if we're going to take you seriously, this is enough to get you labeled a smearer of the students. So Huffington Post led the way last night. They put up a headline that looked like this, and it's just egregious. It says, "Survivor Smearers," with a picture of me personally, and says, "Some conservatives are trying to discredit outspoken Florida shooting survivors." I have not tried to discredit any shooting survivor. I have not smeared any shooting survivor. That's absurd, it's insulting, and it's disgusting. The only thing that I have said about the shooting survivors is the same thing that I said about Jimmy Kimmel when it came to him bringing his son on the show after his son went through an open heart surgery, which is just because you went through suffering does not make you an expert on a particular topic. This has been my consistent stance on virtually every event of major consequence in the United States for my entire career, is that just because you went through something doesn't mean that you have been conferred with certain expertise. And that's what I wrote over at National Review. I had a long piece on it. I've discussed it on the show. But the idea that that is disrespect to the students, to suggest that perhaps they don't know all the details of what they're talking about, or at the very least, they have to show expertise in the topic for me to take their opinions more seriously. I'm happy to take their opinions on what pain and suffering of people who have gone through a difficult situation looks like. They are experts in having gone through a traumatic situation. So I'm happy to hear their advice on what it's like to go through a traumatic situation. In fact, I think that's deeply important stuff for people to hear. But I'm not willing to sacrifice the point of public policy on the basis of I went through something bad, because that makes for bad public policy. Good public policy is not based on empathy. Good public policy is based on reason and logic. But that, of course, is enough to get you labeled a smearer of the survivors, according to the mainstream media. And they've been doing this for days. I mean, for days and days and days, they have been doing this, promoting lies about gun control, promoting lies about people who oppose gun control. And for example, Van Jones, who I personally know, and I like Van, he's an opinion host, but he retweeted a tweet from a woman named Lori Shue, who tweeted, "Common denominators for mass shooters, white males under 30, AR-15s, Republicans." So first of all, maybe AR-15s, maybe not. There are a bunch of other weapons that have been used in these mass shootings, but there is no indicator that these mass shooters were Republicans. Even if you want to say that the Parkland shooter was a Republican because there's a picture of him wearing a MAGA hat, well, earlier this year, or late last year, we had a shooting at a congressional baseball game from a Bernie Sanders supporter. That didn't mean that Bernie Sanders was responsible for the shooting of the baseball players. That's absurd. But Van Jones retweeted that anyway. And that's not the only example of the media covering themselves in glory. Chris Cuomo, earlier this morning, made a fool of himself by tweeting something out that was patently false. And Chris Cuomo tweeted out a story from an account called Cody Davis, I guess, USA Photo Dude. And the tweet said, quote, "I was able to buy an AR-15 in 5 minutes. I'm 20 and my ID is expired." Well, there's only one problem. That never happened. According to the article itself, quote, "After the sales representative walked me through the paperwork, all 5 pages of it, I told him I changed my mind and wanted to think more before I bought an AR-15. He told me it wasn't a problem and listed the store hours if I wanted to come back. I then said thank you and walked back to my car." So in other words, he didn't present an ID and no gun was offered to him. He said that he wasn't going to present an ID. He left the store. That was the end of the story. It didn't matter. Chris Cuomo tweeted out the lie that he was offered an AR-15 without photo ID. Now, when he was called on this, Chris Cuomo over at CNN, the block of wood who attempts to resemble a human being over at CNN, Chris Cuomo actually tweeted out, "Isn't the point that the kid's age and lack of ID wasn't a deterrent? And this isn't all gun shops. Place I bought my shotgun basically goes farther than law requires and makes judgments about whom to sell to. Point is the system should be better." Well, why? Right? The system worked here. He didn't show ID. He didn't get a gun. I'm wondering, they ran a federal background check. If you go to a federally licensed firearms dealer in the United States, according to federal law, they must run a federal background check for a criminal record as well as mental health record, by the way. The problem is that these records